Welcome, everybody. My name is Jason Henderson. I am the publisher at Castlebridge Media, and I am so delighted to be the first one to introduce you to this Latinx Futurist Roundtable. The event, the thing that brings us here together, and I have to say this as the guy who must be promoting everything, the event is the launch of David's new book, The Deepest Green, which comes out today, and we're extremely excited about it. It is the second, this is an epic science fiction novel, the second in a series of 4 that Castlebridge Media is just so proud to be publishing. The characters are just very diverse. It's Latinx, it's queer, it's an extremely complicated and epic and long and wonderful view of this verdant planet, and I'm just so proud of it. So David said, I think the best thing would be to have an event where we get great minds together. So I'm going to get out of the way and let this amazing panel talk, but definitely check out The Deepest Green, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason. So we have some really great people here talking together about something that we all love, speculative fiction, and that I think we all have like complicated relationships with as Latinx people, thinking about and working and writing about themes that intersect with speculative fiction. So I'm just going to kind of introduce everybody in alphabetical order really quickly. I've just thrown together like a really quick bio. You'll have a chance to expand and to correct or add to the things that I say about you right now. So first we have Frederick Aldama. He is the Jacob and Francis Sanger Massacre Chair in the Humanities at the University of Texas in Austin. Go Longhorns, right? A scholar of Latinx representation and pop culture, especially comics. He's the award-winning author of over 48 books, and he's like the series editor of like 9 other like academic scholarly series. So just a prolific, incredible, he's used the word polymath to describe me, but he's definitely a polymath as well. Just a wonderful individual. And I'm so happy to have you with us. Alberto Chimal is an award-winning author of speculative fiction who lives in Mexico City, right? Although he's from Toluca originally. And he teaches creative writing at the Universidad del Claustro de Sor Juana, as well as through his really amazing YouTube channel with these classes that he and his wife and author Raquel Castro put together. I really recommend you check out. Then we have John Picacio. He's an award-winning illustrator of speculative fiction from San Antonio, just down the road from Professor Latinx. Among many firsts, because he's broken barriers again and again and again, John was the first Latinx to ever be a Worldcon guest of honor, which is just really amazing. And he's also the founder of the Mexicanix initiative, which was one of the things that he put together to coincide with that Worldcon. And several of us were members of the initiative, or still are members of the initiative, right? So super happy to have my brother John on. Then we have Jumko Ogata. She's an Afro-Japanese and Chicana writer from Veracruz, where she presently is. She's working on her thesis at the College of Latin American Studies at UNAM. It's a wonderful university. Her issues of interest that she's written prolifically about, and I really recommend that you check out her writing both in English and Spanish, range from identity to racialization, racism, especially racism in Mexico against indigenous and Afro-Mexican people and so forth. We really had hoped that Malka Older would be here with us tonight, but she wasn't able to make it. But I definitely recommend that you check out her amazing work as well. A lot of it is really amazing futurism. But we do have Sabrina Vourvoulias with us. She's an author, essayist, poet, journalist, editor, just like a jack of all trades, basically. She lives in Pennsylvania. You still live in Pennsylvania, or did you move?
No, Pennsylvania.
Still in Pennsylvania. But she was raised in Guatemala. And I tell you what, her near future novel, Ink, it still resonates with me to this day. A lot of critics praise the book, which was recently reprinted a couple years ago. It's just being really prescient about immigration issues, and just being beautifully written in terms of its notions of community. So here we are together to have this conversation. I'm David Bowles. I'm a Mexican-American author and translator, published about 24 books. Some of them have won some awards and stuff like that. It's not a big deal. But I want us to take stock of where we are right now in terms of Latinx speculative fiction. Alberto, a couple of years ago, you wrote this amazing article, and I pulled this line from it, shared it with you guys in an email, but I also want to share it with the audience here. You say, referring to Mexico, but this could equally apply to the US, this is a country with a history of racism that even predates its formation as an independent nation. 500 years of systematic and constant oppression against its native peoples. Ours is a racism so internalized in the dominant culture, so exclusive and embedded with other prejudices that it has completely denied an equitable, varied, and abundant representation of indigenous populations and national media. And in the United States, that is absolutely true of indigenous people, but it is true as well of Black folks and Latinx folks and several other underrepresented groups, as is true in Mexico as well. There are many underrepresented groups. So when we think about Latinx speculative fiction and we think about where we are right now, what would you say when you take stock? What exciting projects are there out there? How far have we come? Just speak to that in any way you want to. I just kind of think we'll go around. Anybody who wants to speak up first can. Just jump.
Once again, hello everyone, and happy to see you and be with you today. I think we are moving. I think we are giving at least some baby steps in the right direction, and I think we have come at least some way towards better representation and better understanding of what we can do from the Latinx communities on both sides of the American border to complement and to represent our realities through speculative fiction in a way that was largely virtually forbidden a few decades back, 30, 40 years ago. It would be unthinkable that some of us should be even talking about those subjects in any setting. So there have been some advancement. There is still much to do, much to remedy in terms of the racism and the structural limitations that are present in the literary and the book publishing establishments everywhere. But I think at least there has been some progress done, and it has come from many different writers from many different communities and points of view. For example, in Mexico, right now, one of our most notable authors is Andrea Chapela, a very young writer who was just mentioned as one of the Granta magazine best writers of the next generation. And that's a first that a science fiction writer, as she herself defines her work, should be on such a list. So that's something many people could only dream about for decades, and many people saw their careers wither and die without anything resembling such recognition.
Thanks, Alberto. Anybody else pop in?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I mean, he's brought up Andrea, so that's another one of us in the Mexicanics Initiative. And when that news went out, I was so thrilled. I do want to say this. I was the guy that founded Mexicanics Initiative, but David, I don't think this gets said enough, was right there with me along with an individual named Christopher Brown, fantastic writer, who's just been cover profiled in Locust magazine. Those two cats were the people that were kind of right alongside me. If I was Batman, those were my two Robin, who were right there with me. And honestly, the family, and which is what I call this group, it's a family, doesn't come together in the way it does without David's awareness of who were the sort of the seeds in the field. And really where he helped me was on the Mexican side of the border. I knew a lot of the seeds that I kind of had in mind on the US side, But on the Mexican side, David was invaluable. So I do want to say that for everybody who's watching out there, it doesn't happen without David, not in the same way it did. Alberto was key. Alberto was one of the people I knew I wanted to be a part of our group. But just to kind of address this, Andrea's one of our family. And yeah, I agree with Alberto that there is progress happening. Where I see it is we do have seeds, but I think what I'm seeing now is there are opportunities starting to happen, and it's a thing of trying to get these, I keep calling them seeds, I need to find a better word real quick, but our people, I want to see us be ready to take on some of these opportunities a little faster. I guess I'm an impatient man, and I think for me, you know, I've always been aware of my culture, but I've only really been doing something about trying to move things forward really in recent years. Some of it inspired by David and some of the other people that I've been spending more time with since I started the initiative. But for what I see is we're showing up. We are being represented a little bit more in stories and on the covers of books. This is all good. There's a long road to go, but I do see opportunities showing up, and I don't see us as a culture being ready. And I just want to say that it's more on the U.S. side that I see that, where certain opportunities open up for, how do I say this? For, I don't like the word gatekeeper, but people who are sort of in positions of power to make decisions and open doors for other folks. And I see chances for us to be in there. We don't seem ready to take those on yet, for whatever reason. And I think that's going to change. I just want to see it happen a little faster. That for me is one of the things I hope I can help with in the next couple of years. That's all I have to say on this at this moment. I'll pass the ball. Anybody else wants to pick it up?
John, let me just say, can I just say, jump in here, like, ready to take on? I'm curious what you mean by that.
Yeah.
Because I see us, all of us, creating, opening and creating and giving opportunity to our students, right? Future generations, new generations, and they're ready. I mean, they're ready. They're more than ready. And then, you know, depending on where they want to materialize, realize their speculative creation, and the more money involved, the more gatekeeping, and I have no problem using that, you know, comes into play. But honestly, it's, you know, like, I think if I'm getting things right, it's that we need a systemic change. We need a revolution. David knows this. We need different editors making decisions. We need different producers in those seats. We need different showrunners. We need different sets of writers in the TV rooms. And I'll leave it at that because I know others want to talk.
Well, we need to stop prioritizing white visions of Latinidad. Unfortunately, you know, I mean, I do think that there's a big difference between the US Latino experience and the experience of a writer in Latin America, in a country like Guatemala. There's an invisibility, and I also think there's a difference between coasts. I suspect that those of you on the West Coast don't feel quite as acutely as those of us on the East Coast, how highly invisibilized our communities are. Even in, you know, Philadelphia has a significant Boricua community. But, you know, many of the magazines and sci-fi publications that I know are, you know, East Coast, I don't see those Boricua writers, you know, in those publications. I think, you know, I'm going to be the token Guatemalteca Chapina here. I was hoping for Malca for a little bit of support, but, you know, the rest of you are either Mexican or Mexican American. And for whatever it's worth, there is to some extent more representation of Mexican American and within the Latin American literary traditions, certainly, you know, we tend to know South Americans and Mexicans, but you know, Central America might as well not exist. You know, Cuba is different. You know, Malca is Cubana, and much of the sci-fi world, and fantasy world, there are some very prominent Cuban American writers in the U.S. and, you know, certainly from the boom we know them, and pre-boom even. But you know, I mean, I feel like there are lots of communities within the United States that are simply invisibilized and that don't have the opportunity of being middle class, of being highly educated, of having access to computers 24/7, to elbow their way into past the gatekeepers.
Yeah, these are all really good points. Jumko, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think there's also a certain degree of nuance to, for example, what Sabrina is pointing out, because while yes, there is a very high representation of Mexicans and Mexican Americans in literature, it's usually white Mexicans and mestizo Mexicans and not so much indigenous, Black, or Asian Mexicans. And so we're excluded from narratives of being Mexican, which is why we suffer so many micro-racist attacks of like, oh, you're Mexican? Oh, you don't look Mexican. Oh, I thought you were like Cuban or something, you know? And I think this is a really big problem on both sides of the border. Like, on one hand, I am very happy to see young women, for example, having a more prominent presence and voice, writing speculative fiction, science fiction, or fantasy, anything under the grand scheme of speculative fiction, but all of those people are white. So I still think that there's a long way to go, because Black and Indigenous and Asian, Mexican or Latinx writers still don't have a space in publishing and in getting our stories out there. And I think that this also has to do with a discussion on cultural appropriation, because a lot of speculative fiction is based in Mesoamerican mythologies or indigenous mythologies, but that are just very odd, like not necessarily something that the author is related to, and rather just like, oh, this is cool, let me just, and that there is a relationship of power power dynamic in them being able to just take that and go on their way, on their merry way. I think we're doing progress, because at least in Mexico, which is the case I can talk about, we're finally having discussions about racism in the literature industry and the film industry, which is the two spaces where I work, but it's still not enough. Just recognizing it exists is the bare minimum. And there's so much more that we have to do. And I also think it would be interesting to question what we consider as Latinidad or Latinx authors when speaking about speculative fiction, because I've never seen anybody refer to Nalo Hopkinson, for example, who's Jamaican, as Latinx. And technically Jamaica's in Latin America, but again, technically, because Latin America is also a very strange category. Or if we're talking about Edwidge Danticat, which also we can debate whether her work is speculative fiction or not, but nobody's mentioning her either. Or even older works like Manuel Zapata Olivella, who was an Afro-Colombian writer that wrote just this enormous like Bible of speculative fiction about Black liberation in the Americas based off Yoruba mythology or the pantheon of the Yoruba. And I never see anyone talk about him as speculative fiction. And it's funny, because what do all of these writers have in common? Well, they're Black. And I think it has a lot to do with the way that we understand Latinidad and who is afforded Latinidad, who is understood as a Latinx, and who is, oh, you can't be this, you're Black, or oh, you can't be that, you're Asian, et cetera, or even peoples that or communities that don't want to be defined, sorry, by this term. I think it's like a very complex and interesting discussion we can have. But even thinking about Guatemala, right now, UNAM, the university where I study and work, have been publishing works of women authors from the last or throughout the 20th century whose works were largely ignored because of machismo. And I think that's fantastic. And they actually published a novel and a couple of stories by different Guatemalan women writers. But the whole collection, the stories and the novels are all by white women. And so it's this need to not only look for gender parity, but search for racial or ethnic representation, which I think is somewhere we still need to focus on a lot.
Yeah, no, this is a really, really wonderful, rich conversation that we do have to keep in mind as we are talking like broadly about, you know, Latinx speculative fiction and Latinx futurism. We need to ask ourselves, I mean, can we even really talk about a single Latinx futurism? I have my doubts. And you know, some of the things that Sabrina and Jumko have brought up, like, you know, point to some of the difficulties. But at the very least, what needs to be happening as we, you know, collectively in fits and starts are working towards, you know, and I'm thinking, of course, of the U.S. market because that's where I work and write, and I'm specifically thinking about the U.S. market for teens and children because the majority of my work is in that, and I see the growth that's happening. And we are constantly, as a community, evaluating how, you know, what that representation looks like, how diverse it needs to be, and lifting up the voices of people whose work colorism and other types of racial oppression and ethnic oppression have, like, you know, in the past, as Jumko has pointed out, was kind of thrust aside in favor of just light-skinned Latinx people's work being, you know, promoted. So like it's got to be both a fight against the external oppression and also a fight for the affirmation of the diversity that exists within this kind of nebulous and dubious bubble of Latinidad, right? And just a constant, like, we have to be willing, and we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and constantly you know, have these conversations. And Jumko and I have them all the time, like on Twitter, where and it's, you know, some people might be made uncomfortable by that, but neither of us are. Just being able to go back and forth and say, have you thought about this? And, oh, no, you know what, you're right. And, you know, let me amend what I'm saying to this. That kind of willingness to be wrong and to listen to other voices and to realize that while, yes, you're struggling against an oppression that all of us face, there are intersectional oppressions that other people within our group face that have been ignored for a long time. So we just have to keep those in mind, I think, going forward. And this brings me to just the idea of futurism itself. If we're going to talk about futurism, and I'll broadly define what I think futurism is. Futurism is a sort of speculation about the future that tries to take the dignity and freedom and self-determination that we all dream of in our underrepresented communities and projects it into the future and tries to make it a reality. It imagines it being a reality. And the first group of people to do this are Black people, mainly in the US, with Afrofuturism and then African futurism on the heels of that. And then right after them come Indigenous people who follow with Indigenous futurism in the late 80s and early 90s, the term is coined and so forth. And so I think we have to, you know, know that we owe a debt as we're talking about possible Latinx futurism to those futurisms that have come before. I want to preface just like our thoughts about futurism with a couple of quotes. One is from Yasnaya Aguilar, who is this really, really brilliant scholar and linguist of the Ayu community in southern Mexico, Oaxaca, right in the mountains of Oaxaca. And she said in this amazing article about, like, you know, Mesoamerican or indigenous Mexican futurism, she invites us to wonder how the world might function without capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, even while worrying that our conquered imaginations might not fully suffice. She says, a large part of the universes of the future are hijacked by the oppressive systems of the present. So it seems logical that even their future denial be contrasted with their current reality, which is kind of like a little depressing to think. As we're projecting our communities into the future, our own colonized selves get projected in the future as well, possibly, right? We have to fight against that. And all of the, the colorism and so forth that we've been talking about might get projected in the future as well if we're not careful. But then she assures us that there are other possibilities latent in that imagined future. She says that these are articulated from other places of enunciation, spaces that historically have neither had a future nor have been considered cutting edge at all. And then Alberto, you in that same article I was quoting from before, you propose a Mexa-futurism, you call it. And I love it, through which writers could bring together works that already interrogate Mexican racism and then craft stories that blow up the myth, and this is a quote from you, of indigenous inferiority and submission, proposing different routes of transformation and development than traditional racist discourses, the veiled deferment proposed by neoliberalism, which, yeah, and don't get me started with neoliberalism in the US and the problems that it's gotten us into, and new contemporary fascisms that we are now living in all these different countries. So all of that is like a huge preamble just to say, can there be a Latinx futurism? What does it look like? What do you think? Just go wild.
Yeah, David, let me just jump in right here, and I'll mention Alberto, all of your work that I know well. Jumko, I know that you are an extraordinary force in kind of pushing and waking people to a kind of internalized coloniality of thought and behavior. So thank you for your work too. But I wanted to mention that it's, so David, there's your work, others here in the panel. We have the capacity to exercise our imagination, our so-called counterfactual capacity in ways that go beyond our present tense and that go way beyond what we're typically seeing in Netflix and Hollywood, where it's usually a decrepit reconstruction of a kind of barbarism that we see in capitalism, but without any kind of opening to something new. It's still the neoliberal kind of ideology that's given our bow tie at the end of our stories in Hollywood. We have the capacity, because I see it with all of your work, to exercise a counterfactual, our imagination, and to materialize it in and through the speculative, the future looking, which can also be a future looking that goes back and reboots a past by resuscitating a mythos into the present. And yet I feel like it's very hard I feel like the stuff that's really radical isn't getting out there. Like, it's not that we have an impoverished imagination when it comes to gender, race, sexuality, culture, age, worldview, emotion systems. Imagining a sentient being with an entirely different emotion system. We're doing that. You guys are doing that. But what happens is it seems like the deeper we go into the publishing world or into the televisual or the film space, the industrial complex that all of these create, the less of that we're seeing. And if it's the less of that we're seeing, how are our audiences, how are we role modeling? How are we opening? How are we waking if there's these structures in place that are just like suffocating all of the things that you guys are doing?
The system is definitely like, one of the things that makes futurism want to exist, right? Is like this wanting to demolish that system. So, I mean, I hear the emotion and the logic in what you're saying. What about the rest of you? How do you see this playing out? Jumko?
Well, it's interesting because a proposal that I've heard a lot here in Mexico, not only from indigenous peoples, mainly from them, but not only them, is the idea of, well, we have this idea of, oh, like I'm going to go into the system and fight from within and change the system from within. But what happens most of the time is that the person's own morals are eroded because the system is just too much. Like an individual won't be able to change the system, and they end up compromising their beliefs or compromising their integrity, and nothing really changes. And an alternative that I find interesting and worth exploring is, okay, well, if the system isn't working for us, and maybe right now liberation, like destroying the system in its whole isn't quite a possibility, well, why not working outside of the system? What alternatives are there to the system? How can we do things outside? And it's funny, David just mentioned her, but Yasnaya actually talks about this a lot: community organizing and community effort as a way to counteract the tentacles of the system in our spaces. And I do recognize that it's a limited influence that it can have, but it's also a question of quality versus quantity. Maybe you won't be able to get your, let's say, your book in the main bookstores of Mexico and the most important bookstores, but maybe if you make it really affordable, then all of the children in your community can read it. And that's like, if you can make a tangible imprint upon them, well, maybe it is worth the effort, even if you don't get nominated for a fancy prize. But if you see the tangible changes you can make in your own communities or spaces where you have an influence, then that's also worth discussing. And it's something that I've been seeing in my own work. I haven't been published by a big publishing house yet, but what I have been able to do is get out some of my short stories through smaller publishing spaces and spaces on the internet. And the people that have been able to read me so far, whose feedback I've been able to hear, have been overjoyed, thinking just upon my fiction concerning the Japanese diaspora in Mexico, because Asian Mexicans are not thought of at all. So somebody saying, hey, like this really reminds me of my own family story. Oh, this really helped me talk about this really tough subject with my own family. Like those types of things can also be worthwhile, even if we're not counteracting the system actively. That's also a way to counteract the system, being like, well, you committed genocide against all of my ancestors. You have always had a voice and a say in who I am, who you think I am. The portrayals that Spaniards have made since the 16th century about who these savages were in the New World. And even though you tried your best to destroy my community, who I am, here I am. And hey, maybe it won't get published by any big editorial, but the fact that I'm writing this, the fact that somebody out there can read that, is already a form of really important resistance and a way to fight the system. Like the small things add up. So I want to think about it in that more optimistic fashion. Maybe it's also because I think I'm the youngest person here. So I'm aware that I'm very much still an idealist type of person, but I really think that it's these small changes that can really add up and ultimately help us think of a different or a better future.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't mean to jump in. I just want to like to say, I mean, great stuff and great ideas. And I think that those of us, yeah, who are older than you, like we were, and maybe still are, I think, idealists. And I know that, like, for example, I know that John and I both have done a lot of like grassroots stuff in our communities. And I started a little indie press, more than a decade ago. That's still going strong. And that's kind of, that work has to be done. Like the way I look at it is you have to both attack from within and attack from without. And that takes guts. It takes like, to both be in the system and participating in it and advocating for change within the system and like getting up people's faces, and then from the outside attack it as well, because then your editors are like, wait a minute, we're paying you a shit ton of money and you're like attacking us. We're like, yeah. And you're going to continue paying me a shit ton of money, and I'm going to continue attacking you because you're wrong, and I have to fight you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to jump on everybody else, but Sabrina, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I did actually, because I'm fortunate as a news person. I get to edit a lot of really smart people. And one of them in Philadelphia is an Afrofuturist. She has created something called Black Quantum Futurism. Her name is Rashida Phillips, and her futurism really has real world application. So like she works with reimagining housing, affordable housing, and talking about how, you know, the two axes that we work with in futurism are temporality and spatiality, both of which are usually in some way, restricted for communities that have been marginalized, right? Our access to them. I'm going to drop her website into the chat, because I think, you know, she, a lot of what they're doing, what she and this collective is doing in Philadelphia is really radically re-envisioning what futurism means in the real world. And so part of it is they've got this community map that has marked places where oral histories are taking place or can be accessed, you know, and the community creates the map as well. But she talks a lot about how, you know, part of futurism is also retrofuturism, right? Is reclaiming and valuing the stories and the temporality that sort of got eliminated from, you know, a white dominant timeline. And even in the way she does it in North Philadelphia is reclaiming, for example, efforts that took place in the 60s, you know, things like a Progress Mall that was set up, that was Black owned, that really sort of appropriated, reclaimed the language of the space race, which African Americans were pretty much shut out of, for the African community itself. And I think, you know, we really, why are we, you know, not looking at the deep thinkers within the, you know, the African American and Indigenous futurists who we can look to sort of take our lead from some of the amazing things that they're doing.
I agree. That's definitely one of the things that we ought to be doing. John, Alberto, you want to add to this conversation about Latinx futurism and the possibilities and stuff like that?
Alberto, I'll let you go first, and I'll go after you.
Okay, going back to what Jumko was saying, I think it's important to consider that this maximalist idea of publishing as much as possible for as wide an audience as possible is actually an idea that's almost impossible to attain almost everybody in the publishing or literary communities. And it always is, and it always will be, as long as we are ruled by these capitalist exploitation principles that form the present publishing worlds. So it's really important to try other logics, so to speak, other forms of interlocking the arts with the communities, as Jumko was saying. And this can happen in many different communities and in many different levels. I don't know if there can be just one Latinx futurism. I think there can be many. I think there can be as many as we need, as many as our communities need, because they can operate in many different levels and many different scales to create these, not only these practical solutions, as Sabrina was saying, which are of course very interesting and very useful in the present real world, but also they can be very useful in this more evanescent activity of training our imagination. Our imagination can be, of course, artistic, literary, but then it can be also political. It can be also environmental. And what we do while reading, while imagining these new and different worlds in which our own communities can assume places, can occupy places that they were historically denied, is also to train ourselves to imagine what could we do in them, or what can we do right now with the tools that we can envision while imagining ourselves in other positions. That's really important. And maybe there are many circumstances in which a maximalist approach to writing and publishing is useless to do that. One needs to go small. One needs to go right to some explicit, very well-defined community and go from there, and not the other way around.
I completely agree with that last, I mean, all of that, but that last bit right there was a home run. Gosh, okay, so I want to hit a couple of things. Professor, so you said something to me earlier where I said something about some opportunities coming and people not being ready. And then I love what you said, your very passionate monologue there about why aren't our more radical visions being put out there? And I think you kind of answered the question you were asking me, which was that's what I want to see is, you know, and Jumko was saying, you know, I want to work from the small press end right now because I feel like that's where I can make a difference at this moment. And I do believe that Jumko is going to see a much wider horizon of awareness of the work, that this is just a start, because we've all been there, right? We've all been there, starting from that end. But, you know, when I was watching David with Dignidad Literaria and the work he was doing there, I completely believe that until I see Alberto Chimal on the end cap of a Barnes & Noble in the US, we haven't gotten there. I mean, and I'm using him as an example of a guy who I feel very passionately about, seeing his work cross into the wider mainstream of literature and creative arts awareness, not just in this country, in the US, but in the world. I will say, I think if Jumko's optimistic, I'm probably pathetically optimistic about, or ambitious, I should say, maybe not optimistic, that's the wrong word, maybe ambitious about what I want to see. I feel like, you know, living in Texas here, I live in San Antonio, and yet I still see a demonization of Mexican and Mexican-American people in this city that is pathetic and disgusting. And it's because, you know, I know Sabrina said that Mexican-Americans seem to be pretty prolific right now in SFF. And that's great if you're seeing that, Sabrina, but I wasn't seeing it when I started that initiative. I also believe that it's important for this initiative of us as Mexicanics to make sure that now that we're starting to get in, we need to make sure we start opening doors for everybody else who's definitely even maybe more marginalized than we are. And I think we're still way out on the margins. I still don't see us represented. We're still going to continue to be demonized until our stories are seen as being part of the mainstream of storytelling. And I agree with what Alberto was saying, or at least the way I took the way Alberto was saying there at the end of his last comment, that we're not there to make them comfortable. We're there to push our visions on our terms. And I believe that until we can put people in place who can not just allow for those things to be seen, but to put the machine behind those things so that the most people see them possible, we're not there. I do believe it can be done. I do believe it can be done within my lifetime. Yeah. Maybe not within the next couple of years, but it's going to happen. But we're going to have to continue to be very aggressive about recognizing opportunities where we can put people in place and then capitalize on putting them in place. And that's what I meant earlier about kind of planting seeds, but then grooming them. Professor, you were talking about it from the creator end. I agree with you. God, there's so many of us that are chomping at the bit and ready to go. I meant more from the gatekeeper end. I want to see it. And again, I want to say, I don't mean it just for Mexican and Mexican-American voices. I mean for all Latinx voices, but we're still very much on the early end of this curve. There's a lot of work to be done, but I do think we've got to break into that larger mainstream of literary and visual arts representation before before there's going to be really any significant progress.
I I often wonder if, you know, part of the problem is, you know, as we all say at some point, but then we don't do it. You know, we have to break the mold. We have to stop allowing white, you know, professionalism or white, you know, sort of literary structure or white imaginings of, you know, sort of the standards we have to stop letting that exist. I mean, I remember my childhood in Guatemala, going to a really, you know, humble movie theater in Zone 7, seeing the film Super San y el Niño del Espacio, which was a lucha libre space movie filmed next door to my grandmother's house by Rafael Lanusa, a Guatemalan filmmaker who put his own kids and his family members in his movies. And everybody, he had the imagination to project us, you know, to see the future. And every super humble person at that Zone 7 movie theater had the imagination to see us in the future.
Yeah.
It's only when we come here and we sort of accept the fact that we're never in the futures,
Yeah.
or that the way our futures, the way we characterize, or the way we sing our futures, or the way we structure them, are not acceptable to within some sort of standard, this false white professionalism standard. So I say, you know, why are we accepting that as the standard?
Yeah, no, we shouldn't be. I want to preface like my response to this with just some quick numbers about publishing. So the audience is aware, like fewer than 1% of the books published every year, all the books of all genres, fewer than 1% of them are written by Latinx authors. I mean, that is just harrowing. And when, you know, I think about children's literature in particular, you know, the space that I move in the most, we're talking, you know, 5-6% of books, of like 3,500 books, 3,800 books published every year for kids and teens, being written by Latinx people, even though we make up in aggregate 18, almost 20% of the population. So my concern with, I think that all the things that we're saying can be true simultaneously. I think it can be true that we need to be working at a grassroots level in our communities to promote our local voices, our regional voices, the voices of our community. You know, it's different being fronterizo, transnacional, aquí en la frontera con Mexico, than it is being a Mexican American in San Antonio, where John is. We have lots in common, but my community is very specific, and our identity is unique to this area. And so there's work that I need to do here, and promoting the voices that I need to do here. However, the alighting of Black voices and the Asian voices and Latinx voices at the national level, in schools, especially in libraries and English classrooms and so forth, has a deleterious effect on the way we are treated at the national level, the way we continue to be erased. Because if you grow up and the only mirror you have as either a white kid or a kid from a community of color is a mirror that reflects whiteness back at you, everyone else is a ghost. Everyone else, it's like they don't exist. And that is, you know, one of the factors that foments the racist fascism that has never let go of power in this country, that has, you know, waxes and wanes, but is like now, you know, like ferociously, you know, grabbing at the throat of our democracy. And like you can't combat that only at the community level. The community level is one way of fighting it, but you have to use the mechanisms of getting books out in front of a lot of people. We need, you know, the Elizabeth Acevedos and Jason Reynolds you know, and Carmen of the world to like be publishing their books that are, you know, bestsellers and read by millions of people, because that keeps us in the game. As long as this is still a corporate capitalist nation, and it will continue to be so for the foreseeable future, unfortunately, as Jumko has pointed out, it doesn't feel like we're going to be tearing that system down anytime soon, although everybody in this panel will probably be down for the revolution tomorrow if we could get out there and go. And so since that system exists, I personally am not willing to let our community leave that money on the table and not take our seat at it and take that and bring it into our communities. I'm not willing to let that happen. So I think that like I want to do both things, right? I want to think about a future that's different, that isn't corporate capitalist, that is rooted in, and I'll get to this in our next question, that's rooted in ancestral past and other ways of being. But I also want us to grapple with the realities and use, you know, and try to get into that national conversation and fight at that level as well, and reform publishing companies from within as well as from without, while we're also doing this other work. I just think that all of it needs to be done. It's exhausting just to think about how much fucking work needs to be done, frankly. Oh my gosh. All right, so since I've said that, you know, Sabrina, you mentioned retrofuturism, and I think that's really important, because one of the things about futurism is that it is rooted in the past, and in an attempt to take an erased or forgotten or marginalized past and reaffirm it, and then in that gesture of reaffirmation, make it relevant in the present, like try to create like an alternate pathway in the present for our community, like a dream of the world that we want to have exist now, as well as the future. And you know, Yasna Yatuk, I keep going back to her because she's just bloody brilliant. Like literally everything she writes, just for is an amazing thinker. In that same article, she's thinking about the indigenous populations, the indigenous nations that existed at the time of the Spanish invasion of Mesoamerica, and you know, like the cruelty and genocide and rape and so forth that they suffered, that are the repercussions of which are still being felt today in the flesh of indigenous people and Black people and Asian people in Mexico and throughout Latin America, as well as the blended descendants of those encounters. She says, in these circumstances, the chances that in the 21st century, the indigenous peoples of that moment could continue to exist, speaking our languages and recreating our own forms of organization, must have seemed implausible. Against all odds, our structures have come this far into this future. So that like the future that the Ayuk community that she's from is living right now is a speculative future for her ancestors. It would have been a dream to them that yes, we're going to go through so much, but there will be on the other side of this 500 years in the future, we will still be, you know, recognizably part of the same community. And we will somehow, against all odds, keep this together because our values and our community are powerful enough to withstand 500 years of colonial oppression and then nationalism under the Mexican system. And she finds not only optimism in this endurance, but also an answer to the ongoing dystopia that feels like it's going to be the eventual future of a lot of our communities. It seems inevitable that we are facing a climate catastrophe, she says, but indigenous communities in Mexico can already perceive that their response to these challenges, their vision of the future on the other side of catastrophe, needs to be just as rooted in knowledge gleaned in the past as the responses of their ancestors 5 centuries ago to these new things that were impinging on their existences. And she like kind of wraps up by saying, starting with those lessons, we can write futures using multiple and diverse spatial metaphors, drawing from indigenous languages, she's arguing. That's the wager, the possibility of conjugating our world in the future tense. And so I want just to hear your thoughts about that, tapping into los ancestros, which is obviously more complicated for lack of a better, de-indigenized people, mestizos, whatever the hell you want to call it, right? Obviously more complicated because we have the syncretic culture into which are deeply woven indigenous story and ways of thinking and cooking and so forth, but that are completely de-indigenized and have been, across centuries attenuated and made different, right? But for all of us, what does it mean to anchor our futurism in our ancestral past? What do you think? Is that viable?
Can I jump in here, David?
Yes, of course, jump.
Real fast.
Yep.
So there's always in that move of both a move of conservation, a move of the conservative in the strict sense of that, and also the progressive, the future seeing that looks to the past, to allow for to clear a space for a future generation. Okay, but I don't know what you guys think about this, but I think we can do better when we go that retro, right? We can do better in that I feel like we are still mind shackled. We're going back and we're kind of revitalizing and bringing forward, but we're not selecting out and bringing newness into that present and future. And by that, I mean, so often I feel like, yes, I love that now, now what's there, it's sort of code switching and we're sort of in that space. And I love that we're seeing a different, we're decolonizing our past and bringing that mythos alive in our present and future. But I also see it carrying into the present and future a lot of conservative ideologies. I'm talking about things like, romances that are, very typically kind of straight. Going back to Jumko's point about colorism. And it's like, okay, I think I love what we're doing, but we can do better.
Yeah, well said. Anybody else want to chime in?
I also think, just observing, Guatemala is very different than Mexico in that there was far less mestizaje, and there are, communities that have, retained traditions from pre-Hispanic times, without breaking or interruption from language in any number of ways. And I think the issue is, it's in fact the indigenous folks that have that are most traditional, that have been most impacted by climate change. So you see in many of the immigrants from Guatemala to the United States that go through Mexico are really from the area of the Cuchumatanes, where, the impacts of global warming are being felt most egregiously. And so, on some level, what we need to do is somehow find a way to facilitate for the folks that are coming through with that very, as Frederick said, a very conservative and very traditionalist set of knowledge and experiences and languages, to somehow open space for them who have been impacted by climate change, who have been impacted by the erosion of traditional ways, not by choice, but by nature, and open up to them the idea of, okay, now, where is the future here? Well, how do you, these are the folks that we should be looking at in terms of futurisms that are retrofuturisms. And I don't know that any of us, living in the US or mestizos or, who are sort of generationally divided from from these traditions, from, you know, sort of understanding, because these traditions, at least in Guatemala, are very place specific, right? So once you throw migration into it and climate change into it, and the place itself changes, you know, what tools do they bring to their understanding and their life, and can they, you know, share those tools in a retrofuturistic way, through literature, through art, through dialogue with us. And I really think that that's who we need to be listening to.
Jumko, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sorry, could you repeat the question? Because I've been thinking about what everyone else has been saying. It's
Yeah,
like,
no,
oh,
I mean,
snap.
yeah, no, it's like, it's a super broad question also. So no, it's just like the notion of should these varied Latinx futurisms that we've been talking about, that, you know, Alberto, I think that we all agree there can't just be one, but like, how can we best root them in ancestral past? Does that make sense to be looking at the past and make these retrofuturisms that are trying to revitalize the past and bring them in and bring it into the present as an anchor for our visions?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Well, I really think it depends on the author. I don't think we can make broad generalizations according to yes, we should, or no, we shouldn't. And I think it really depends on, like I said, the place of enunciation. So for example, Indigenous, Black, Asian communities definitely would benefit from writing in and anchoring our stories in our past and in our community and family histories, because they are histories that are usually either excluded from national narratives or told in a different manner that perpetuates violence toward us. On the other hand, white and mestizo narratives have been done quite a lot. So, and also that a lot of, for example, mestizo narratives that are anchored in the past use or are based on these nationalist ideas of a glorious indigenous past that end up erasing contemporary indigenous groups, thinking of them as, oh, like the Maya, wow, they were amazing, too bad they're gone. And it's like, no, Mayas are in all of these areas, right. So it's not fair. Or other ideas of like, oh, and this is why I forgot to correct you a while ago. I stopped identifying as Chicana and moved towards Pocha when I realized how racist Chicano ideology can be as well. Because they have this whole idea of like, oh, Aztlán, los Aztecas. Well, first of all, they didn't call themselves that. Gringos are the ones that started calling them Aztecs. So let's step away from that for starters. And then not all of the people that migrated, the Mexican people that migrated to the US, were Nahuatl. And using that whole big, oh, like, yes, I must be. Well, no, you're not. Like, you could be, but it's not necessarily. And trying to put yourself right and putting yourself under that category is just erasing what actual Nahuatl people that grew up Nahuatl, speaking Nahuatl or not, but that know themselves to be Nahuatl, are doing and writing. So I think it's a case by case or community by community basis. But if communities that have been historically misrepresented by people in power or narratives that have been in power have the ability to write and narrate from our pasts and redignifying these stories, and I think it would be a really, really interesting way of exploring the genre.
Awesome, well said. Anybody else? Alberto, John?
I'll jump in. Well, Alberto, you go, and then again, I'll come after you. Go ahead.
Okay. Just to keep going around what's being said lately, I think what we can do, or another thing that we can do, and maybe we're not doing with the energy we should right now, is what we're getting at this panel, which is to call into question those blanket terms and labels that define or try to define what we can write or what we cannot write. As just like mestizo or Chicano, the very term Latin American is a blanket term that was coined from the outside. So, and which erases many differences between regions and communities, as Sabrina was telling earlier. So at the same time, even a term like futurism can be criticized, examined from many different perspectives, because it comes from the original idea of science fiction as an offshoot of this Enlightenment European thinking of progress, of perpetual progress, that was this kind of myth about the perpetual ascension of humanity thanks to rational thought and scientific thought. We know now that is a much more complicated process than they thought in the 18th century. And there is not a fixed or single goal to try to attain in the future, nor even a single concept of the future. So we can open up our own narratives, I think, to try and encompass many other different aspects of what ultimately means not only or not just a possible future or a list or an analysis of things to come or things that can come, but in a wider sense, it means the possibility to imagine options, alternatives, not just in the sense of the alternative future, which is a subgenre of science fiction, but many different options. I'll say that again, to our current circumstances, to our current ways of living, to our current ways of thinking about our lives. And I think we as representatives or members of many different communities that are not in the mainstreams of our countries, of our nation states, are in a very good position to try and do so, because we can see the other side of those hegemonic and dominant discourses about the present and the future, about what we have and what we should be aspiring to.
Beautifully said.
I know. I just wish he'd just keep going. I'm just enjoying this guy.
We should just like, yeah.
Dude, I love you, man. I'm serious.
Let's have Jumko and Alberto just have a conversation. The rest of us will
No, man, I just enjoyed the hell out of that. No, I mean, I guess as I listen to everybody, I'm just enjoying this. You know, I said this, it's funny. I mean, Dianita, who may still be over there listening to us, she's probably going to hear an echo here when I say this, because I don't know what event or panel I was doing within the last week or so, but I said something about the key to success in art being making it personal, taking it personal and making it personal. And I don't think we're going to really have progress for Latinx stories and representation until our attempts to make the universal personal are seen as accepted. And I'll go back again. I keep using that word mainstream. I need to find a better word. But when I say mainstream, I don't mean kowtowing to what other people's comfort levels are. I mean changing the course of the mainstream and expanding it so that our stuff is included within it. And you know, David, I know you kind of spoke to that earlier. I think we both believe in that. But at the same time, I do want to say, when I say that, I am not putting down what Jumko's saying about, hey, we don't have to just work through that conduit. I completely agree with that. And I think we've got to be working from both ends of it. And I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. Absolutely, it has to be a both and. But I do want to just throw in there that I think part of the key to this is, like, you know, as I'm listening to this panel, I think about David. You'll need to correct me on this one. So there's Aztec Empire. It's a mutual friend of ours on Twitter. Is it Paul Guinan?
Paul Guinan. Paul Guinan.
Thank you, man. Guinan. I know he's done a lot of great comics work over the years, like with Dark Horse especially, and but he's doing this wonderful Patreon sponsored strip called Aztec Empire, and he's very much into, you know, historical accuracy and getting all the details right. And I think there's a lot of room for those kinds of stories. Personally, although I am going to continue to, I'm fully on board with what he's doing. I'm a lot more interested in things where we are taking those old structures and making them our own and making them contemporary. And what I do want to say is, as our stories and representations personally, hopefully continue to be more visible, I do think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we open up doors for other people who are coming up behind us. It's why I did start the initiative, and the initiative was always supposed to be about, it was never supposed to be about me. It was about who's coming up behind us.
Yeah.
And picking, the reason I picked the people I did is I thought they were in the best position to then open up doors for another wave behind us. And so I hope that the stories that we do, as we make them more personal, allow us to bring in bring in opportunities for others to tell their stories. And I hope that cumulative stacking of representation starts to break those doors down. But I do agree that, or maybe I'm misreading it, but when I heard Profe talk about that conservative element, I do agree, at least from the way I look at it, and that I do think that that's detrimental to always be trying to look at things in sort of this universalist way. Yeah, make it personal.
Yeah, I think that we're kind of like all in agreement that the universal comes from the specific, and that Jumko's point that this is that this question is really a question for individual authors, and each author's circumstances are going to kind of hopefully lead. I mean, there are bad faith actors, and there have been bad faith actors. They were the majority for the longest time, and now there's still plenty of them. And so in trying to build community and repair damage and move together and open doors for people, we also have to be conscious of the fact that there are people who maybe have worked in ways that we're attempting to work, but from a much more I'll use my own example as a way to kind of like get at what I mean. So I went to college. I'm from this rascuache pocho kind of like background in the working class. The Garza family, my dad's side of the family, working class Mexican American, living in South Texas. Some of them since the mid to late 1700s, and others coming in waves during the 1800s. But just like long time Tejanos, whose culture is unique, but also like it's part of that fusion that occurred during the years of colonial New Spain with the caste system and all that stuff. And so when I got to college, and I came to grips with, in a couple of classes, in a world literature class, which is the first class I ever read a Mexican American novel in. It was Sandra Cisneros' House on Mango Street, in a world literature class, not in, she's American Latina, but had to wait till be in world literature to read her book. And then in an intro to anthropology course where we were studying dichos and recetas and like the cuentos that my grandmother Garza used to tell me when I was a kid as anthropological objects of study, and then also being introduced to pre-invasion sacred stories of like pre-invasion Mayan and Nahua and Purepecha and other types of peoples, that I realized that for centuries something kind of important had been erased from my ancestors' like heritage, but that it had survived in bits and pieces, and I began to see in my 20s these connections between all the stories that my grandmother and my tios and tias told me about lechuzas and la llorona and la mano pachona and all these other like traditions of things that you do and don't do at certain times of the year and so forth, that didn't necessarily completely coincide with Catholicism, but that were something deeper and older. And as I dug in, and began to uncover where these threads had come from, it pulled me deeper and deeper into the indigenous past of Mesoamerica. And here I am, 30 years later, having spent 3 decades like trying to redefine myself in this, not redefine myself, but to understand what these threads were and give them names, and recognize that, like, whatever you call it, that syncresis needed to be recognized, and rather than like a lot of Hispanics and Mexican Americans have done, rather than follow the carrot that like los gringos como buen arrieros que son, like they dangle out in front of you the carrot of like whiteness, of political whiteness, conservative political whiteness, and the hegemonic power that comes with it, rather than follow that and become, you know, a member of the white community, that it was better to decenter my European heritage and find ways to put on equal footing with it in my own soul, in my own heart, these indigenous strands. And it's work of like decades of breaking and restructuring in identity and learning Nahuatl, and like spending lots of times in Mexico. You know, like I have a house in a little Zapotec community on the coast of Oaxaca, where, you know, spend time just trying to decolonize yourself. And it's imperfect work, but it's work that if you set out to do it, and you set out to be a better person, and to accept the privilege, as in my case, as a light-skinned you know, Mexicano, in the nation that I live in, and use it to the benefit of people who have been erased in my own community, and in this country, then, you know, that kind of work, it's hard work. I mean, I didn't get my first book published till I was 41 years old, because I was spending so much time becoming an educator and trying to use these transformative processes for young people in my community, to get them to stop thinking about, oh, I'm going to go to school so I can make a lot of money and survive in this capitalist system, and you know, like buy a car, and, you know, the kinds of things that mattered to them, and try to show them a separate set of values that had been kind of eroded over time because of the, you know, nationalism, Mexican nationalism to some extent, although that really impacted a lot of people in my community because we've been here since before Mexico was a nation. But yeah, you know, there's influence through immigration and so forth, and try to give them like another way of looking at the world. And so when I think about writing and pulling from, you know, pre-invasion, like indigenous philosophy and stuff like that, it's coming from a place of like study and deep connectedness. There are plenty of people, however, who are just like, as Jumko said, oh, that's kind of a badass image. Let me, like, you know, put it in an Aztec, or like I wrote recently a couple of scathing reviews of some books that do this. You know, oh, let's put some scary, bloodthirsty Aztecs, you know, sacrificing somebody, and woo, this will be like the new Game of Thrones or whatever, right? And without any kind of like actual appreciation of any of the implications, religious and spiritual and cultural and so forth, of those things. So it's you know, it's a super complex thing, and every person has to come to, every writer, every creator has to come to the place of like how they're going to anchor the story that they want to tell, how comfortable they are in reclaiming some of that stuff, and grappling with being de-indigenized, and like what that means, and doing the work that is required to lift up indigenous voices when you are, you know, doing some of that work to reroot yourself in indigeneity to the best of your ability, given that you no longer belong to an indigenous community, indigenous nation, right? So it's yeah.
I also just want to insert here that I think it's really important to note that, you know, the experience of recent immigrants is quite different than those who are second generation, first generation, and that there is a sense of, you know, whether you're in exile or whether you, you know, you've been, you know, forcibly moved from your homeland, your country of origin, or you've chosen to come there. There is a certain sense of rootlessness that does make you look back, you know, at whatever you know, very few of us are purely one thing or another, but, you know, the what makes you who you are and where you were born, and trying to bring some of that rootedness to your new place. And I think that that is also really a part of, we have to include that in part of Latinx futurism, because, you know, those of us in diaspora, those of us whose experience is no soy de aquí ni soy de allá, you know, also are part of the Latinx future.
Yeah, well said. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. We've got 3 questions in the Q&A. We're going to take a look at them and like just kind of quickly go around and answer them, and then we'll have one final wrap-up question that's more about like just what we recommend, what we see on the horizon, things that we're doing or that other people are doing that we want for our audience to know about. So we've got 3 interesting questions, or maybe 4. So originally, Miguel Garcia had asked a question of Alberto that Alberto answered, but he was also asking this question, and maybe we've kind of addressed it to some extent, about the experience of like mestizo nationalism in Mexico versus the understanding of mestizaje by Mexican Americans, by progressive Mexican Americans. And you know, Jumko has touched on the very real and scary strand of racism and nationalism, and especially in like early varieties of the Chicano movement that are still kind of alive. This notion that you could turn the U.S. Southwest into a Mexican American homeland, when like, no, not que ver. I mean, that's the homeland of indigenous people that live there. The ancestors of the Nahuas left and so for all of you who still, and I have articles on Medium that I suggest you read, but those of you who still believe that like the Mexica literally left the U.S. Southwest and traveled within a couple of decades to the Valley of Mexico, like, no, that's completely ahistorical and ridiculous. The ancestors of the Mexica and the Mexitin came out of El Bajío, which is also called La Chichimeca, which is an area of Mexico to the northwest of the Valley of Mexico. And they traveled through Huastec lands for a couple centuries before, you know, finally settling in the Valley of Mexico, where other Nahua groups had. There was no coming out of the U.S. Southwest and immediately that's not the way this works. The ancestors of the Nahuan peoples left what is now the U.S. Southwest about 4,000 or 5,000 years ago. So, and they didn't speak Nahuatl at the time. They spoke a type of Uto-Aztecan language that no longer exists. But so yeah, setting that aside, yes, there is a difference between the way Mexican Americans think when they say mestizo. It's more of like an affirmation, more of a way of saying, I am not just Spanish. I am not going to allow white people to say, oh, but you're white, because that's what like literally happened to oppress us in Texas, for example. I did my doctoral thesis on school segregation and like the legal uses of whiteness to oppress Mexican Americans. Like we would be put on trial and the jury would be like just all white dudes. And if we complained, wait a minute, there's no Mexican Americans. So they're like, no, Mexican Americans are white. These people are white. Y'all are white. What are you bitching about? That was like literally, it was a mechanism both to, like I say, like a carrot to attract people, and also like a bludgeon to keep Mexican Americans in their place. So, I flatly refuse to be white, in the sense of white is a hegemonic group that just is in opposition to anything that isn't that. It's gross and fake and made up or whatever, but it is like a political reality. And a lot of Mexican Americans do. And so when we say things like mestizo or Chicano, it's just ways for us to try to find like a word to describe our otherness from whiteness. And it's imperfect. All these terms are imperfect. And so, yeah, I mean, I get into uncomfortable conversations with people from Mexico, because obviously the way mestizo has been used in Mexico, especially by the Mexican government in this, like, this attempt to create a national identity that will erase everything else, that will erase
La raza cósmica, ¿no?
La cósmica, yeah, all that kind of, yeah. I know, I agree that that's bullshit and it needs to stop. And I'm willing to drop mestizo, but you know, at the same time, like I don't want people to automatically assume that if they hear a Mexican American call themselves, you know, mestice, that is automatically like. I just wish that there were a little more, like what Sabrina was saying earlier about like really conservative people who have different experiences of the world, and like just holding space for them, and I just wish people would hold space for, you know, maybe clumsy attempts, but nonetheless attempts at being something other than settlers and oppressors, right? But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, whatever. Like, it's also cool if you say no, fuck that, and I'm that's fine too. I mean, I can live with it. I've got thick skin. I can handle it. No worries. Let's look at these other questions. I'm sorry that I jumped. I just feel like that question we kind of talked about it. Julia Guzman, Jason's wife, asks whether we agree with this assessment that look, it's kind of hard because people have answered the questions. Okay, yeah. Julia asks, are white Hispanics people of color? And Jumko answers, no, even if they're not Anglo, doesn't mean they don't benefit from their whiteness. Right. So, I mean, I agree with that. What I tell people is, and I'm sorry, I don't like the term white Latino, but I guess a white Latinx person would be somebody who's purely European. So yeah, there are probably some, but I prefer. Well, I'm just saying.
Oh, sorry. Just to.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to agree at the same time that I'm differing. I'm just saying you're right. They might belong to a community of color, but they are not people of color. Absolutely not. Yeah.
I think that
at the same time, they're not a dominant. They're not the dominant.
Right. So
community, right? So
right,
even us light-skinned Latinos who didn't grow up in the States, we're not the dominant community in the United States.
In the US, that's
right. But within the Latinx communities, like the generation of Latinx as a broad term, white Latinos or Latinx people have dominated within these spaces. Let's think In the Heights. That's directed and written by two white Latinx peoples. In most diversity and inclusion panels that include or that pride themselves on having Latinx people, it's usually also white Latinx. So that's why I think we have to talk about nuance. While white Latinx people may be racialized in the US because of their surnames, for example. So Gonzalez, you're a Latino, you must be this and this and this. At the same time, their material realities moving through the world are also largely influenced by how people see them. So maybe if I don't ask you for your name and I see you, I will treat you like a white person, and then you'll have certain racist dynamics if someone, I don't know, sees your name or you speak with an accent that people tag as Latinx. But I don't think, like, that's why I think we really have to lean into nuance. Like, both truths can be a reality for these communities. So you can benefit within your community while also being oppressed to a degree by Anglo people or white, but whiteness is a very broad spectrum. And in Latin America, white Latinos pride themselves in being white and know that they're white. Even white mestizos, right? So thinking of actresses, like even the biggest actresses in Hollywood that are of Latin origin, Sofia Vergara is white, but she racialized herself by getting a tan and speaking in a really like loud fake accent. Let's see, like Desi from I Love Lucy, Desiderio, Ricky Ricardo, was white, but he also benefited from racializing himself and talking in a really like loud Caribbean accent, which is associated to Blackness. So I think we have to really think about how these nuances function and not make these broad generalizations like, oh, all white Latinos aren't white, or oh, all white Latinos are always on top. Just thinking about like nuance. It's basically
nuance, intersectionality. All these things are super important. Like in my book, They Call Me Güero, is like the entire book is basically about that. About like what does it mean to be light-skinned, even within a family? Because what happens because of the admixture of ethnic and cultural and racial groups is that like in my own personal family, like my brother's Black, Then I have a brother who's like lighter skinned than I am, and then there's me that, you know, with light skin but like dark hair and dark eyes. And then my dad was dark complected, and my mom was not even, she's not Latina. So those what'll happen is you'll have, in a typical family, you'll have el güerito, el moreno, and then the guy who's like blanco aperlado or whatever it happens to be, right? And the family itself will like defer to the light-skinned kid, and it's just like these horrible dynamics that come from internalized, you know, colonialism and racism. And so, you know, one of the things that Güero has to do in the book is he's got to grapple with the fact that he's got privilege from being white passing, from being a light-skinned Mexican-American kid that he didn't ask for, but he cannot give up. Like, all his relatives are like, dude, I hear you. I know that, I hear you saying that you wish you were darker skinned, but you're not. And the whole world is going to treat you differently, and doors are going to open for you that don't open for us. And so then, you know, what do you do about this agony you feel? You hold the doors open. You use the power and privilege that you have to help those of us who can't have access to that, you know, get access to it. And that's the dilemma. I think that rather than like spending time thinking about the question, like I am perfectly fine saying I am a light-skinned Mexican American. I pass for white easily. I have a white mom. I mean, it's like, you know, it is, my situation is super distinct than like from like my brother Fernando, whose mom was black, and he's half black, half Mexican American. Like the growing up together, just the experiences we would have separately versus together were like just very, very different. And instead of like sitting around thinking about that and like moping or like whatever stupid shit that some you know, white Latinx people do, I'm just like, this is who I am, and this is the way society treats me, and it is up to me to do something about that and to use it to the advantage. Like, if I think that the system is unfair, then I need to find ways to reform the system, rather than like gloating in it. And so, yeah, again, just like the other things I've been talking about, there are plenty, maybe even the majority of people are bad faith actors where this comes. And so, you know, I always caution light-skinned Mexican Americans, light-skinned Latinx people, don't get your back up about this kind of stuff. You know, sure, it's not your fault, but it's the way it is. And so, since it's the way it is, deal with it, grapple with it, you know, show people that you are something other than what they've experienced. You wish that, you know, like darker skinned Latinx people didn't treat you with reticence and distance because they suspect that you're like a lot of other light skinned Latinx people. Well, then show them that you're not, you know, lift them up, amplify their voices, support their work, donate to their friggin', you know, their PayPal accounts and their GoFundMe's and things like that. Do the work, put your privilege to work for them. And that's the way you show solidarity, and you prove to people that you are not going to allow the perception of white hegemony of who you are to dictate who you actually are. So, you know, I just think that the hand wringing has got to stop. Like, if you're listening, if you're within the sound of my voice, y eres un Latino, si eres un Latino güero, una persona latina o sea, con blancura, nada más cállate el hocico y pórtate bien. Just do what needs to be done. Déjate de quejar. That's just so annoying to hear people going on. But my ancestors were indigenous. Well, very well.
Good for you, bruh.
Good for you. What are you doing to support indigenous people in the world right now? That's the question, right? Anybody else want to chime in on that? I'm sorry, I take the mic. Yeah, John.
John has his, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I think there's something we've also left out here, and I got to give it up for Pepe Rojo, who David and Alberto and Raquel and Chris Brown kind of brought to my attention back when we were doing the initiative. And Pepe taught me something, and we have not brought it up, or at least I didn't hear it. Correct me if we did bring it up, but I've had the habit over the course of my life of always calling myself an American. And Pepe put out, Alberto, I think you remember this, when there was a video that Pepe put together that he basically said, he put into question and in fact into very potent critique, the notion that us here living in the US keep calling ourselves exclusively Americans. And ever since that video, I've tried my best and this year I've been pretty damn good about it, I must say, just consistently in writing and in verbal exchanges to stop calling myself that.
Yeah.
I'm a
Yeah,
US, I'm a USian. And I think that's another way in which we have not brought up in this conversation of trying to change our habits here in this country, in the US, so that, and that's going to be a process that's going to go beyond my lifetime. I know it's not going to change in my lifetime, I suspect. But people who are not part of our field, who are not progressive, they completely look at me like I'm like, what are you doing? And I don't care. I'm going to continue to use that word, continue to teach it, continue to explain it. But I think that's another way, and an important way, of trying to make sure that we are getting over ourselves, I think is the phrase I often use, so that we can hopefully open up understanding that it's not all about us. Jumko,
It's surprising, I think, for most US folks when they hear folks from, you know, Mexican immigrants or Guatemalan immigrants or, you know, Salvadoran immigrants say, you know, yeah, you know, we're from the Americas. Or if you hear, you know, Los Tigres del Norte and Calle 13 singing about America, and it's like, no, it's not about the US, right? And I think, you know, it's something that startles US born and raised folks a lot, that is even an issue.
But I also think that it's an important part of deconstructing the imperialistic ideas that we've been taught. Like, it's like, oh, it's your fault for thinking. It's like, well, we've all been raised to be anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, anti-Asian, racist, homophobic, transphobic, like very violent in our thought, because that's what the system teaches us. And none of us, as we said a moment ago, exist outside of the system. We were taught to exist and think in these ways, and our beginning acts of rebellion are daring to think differently. And I really think that's great to start using USian, because it's a big discussion, at least in the spaces I'm in Mexico. I for context, for those of you that don't know, my university, UNAM, is Mexico's largest public university, and so it costs me approximately like 2 cents tuition every semester, and very like anti-imperialistic discourse. At some point, the Latin American Studies program was thought to counteract the US Latin American Studies programs that were very much like, here CIA, here's the information you need, do your thing. So thinking about America as a continent instead of a country is the first step in like, well, maybe I've been centering myself in the discussions on this matter. So what can I do? Well, language, words are, us as writers, our most powerful tools. So we can definitely start here to begin, so that we can actually imagine these futures that we're talking about right now. And I think these are really productive discussions to have, because we, like, instead of thinking of yes, but, or, well, no, actually, we can do yes, and we can see how we all have different realities, and we may not have lived the other person's reality, but that doesn't mean that that reality doesn't exist. And so also all of these realities can exist, and they don't, it's not one or the other. And I think that's another very white colonialist imperialistic way of thinking. It's either black or white, like there's no gray. And so, well, what about scales of gray? Like there are so many realities that we fail to acknowledge because we think, well, if it's not this, then it mustn't exist. Well, no, that's not the case. I just wanted to add that to what John was saying.
Okay, well, if y'all don't mind, because we're really like coming to the end of our time, I want to go around, and this kind of, I think, will connect to Felicia's question, and where she's asking about how we may have individually used our individual and or the many and complex Latinx histories to imagine the future. So we could, if we want to talk about our own work, we can. But basically, want to go around and just recommend things. What's on the horizon? What events are coming up that you know about, or something that you want people to keep, to put in a calendar, or something that you've done that you want to recommend people to take a look at if they want to know more. So this is kind of like just plugging stuff that we want to plug, right? So let's just go around. Professor Latinx, why don't we start with you?
So let me just say this too, in kind of in reflection on all that we've been talking about. I know Bill Campbell's in the audience, or he was. He published, as you guys know, Sabrina's Ink, among many others. But he was also on the ground with me when we created, with John Jennings and Ricardo Padilla, SoulCon, the Brown and Black Comics Expo in Columbus, Ohio. And on that in that spirit, I wonder if, and this goes back to our discussion about community and particularity and the personal, if indeed the community, as we envision it, isn't just our community, but a community that is Asian Pacific Islander. I know that's also Native, that's Latinx in all of the ways that we are. And, I feel like it's in those spaces that we are at once most vulnerable and also most solid and strong together, where we can unlock our creativity and potentially, and even I've seen it in many, many cases, realize what we might call a radical futurism. In other words, it's through solidarity with our communities that we make community, and that will ultimately, I think, unlock a kind of radical imagination that points us to this kind of radical futurism. Bill Campbell's there. I mean, all the things we've been talking about. I know, for instance, this morning I was on the phone with John Jennings. He brought me on to the Abrams Megascope series where we publish BIPOC comics. And he's like, man, I didn't know about the Kamazots and like this whole mythos and mythology and that predates Batman. Where can I want someone in the community, wherever that might be in the Americas, to kind of bring that story. And I'm like, well, let's go to David. Let's go to, Raul, their Clockwork Curandera and all the stuff that they're doing there. But let's also go to Henry Barajas and his Helm Greycastle stuff, So that kind of energy and synergy, I think, is our future. I'm leaving OSU, as you guys know. I'm going to Texas. So my plug is the BIPOC Comics and Multimedia Arts Expo. That will be March 10th through 13th. Please come. I want all of you. It is, it's exactly the kind of community that I could only dream up, but that we all work hard to make a material reality, and that is transformative for future gens and for us.
Cool. Jumko, you want to tell us something that you want to plug? What's going on?
Sure. Well, as a side note, as a recommendation for those of you that speak Spanish, I would really recommend checking out Chango el Gran Putas, which is like this huge, amazing novel by Manuel Zapata Olivella, an Afro-Colombian writer. The whole novel is free on the internet. The Ministerio de Cultura de Colombia uploaded it for free access. All of his work is available through their page. And as far as my own work, I'm going to be putting out next week my podcast with Mexico's public radio, IMER. It's called Yo Soy Negra, Cuestionando la Tercera Raíz, and we're going to be talking about all of the ways that we explore and live Blackness in Mexico. And I'm going to be doing a workshop on anti-Asianness or anti-Asian racism in Mexico. So you can also follow me on my social media for those dates. They're going to be in Spanish for now, but if enough people ask me to do it in English, I can open up another space for English speakers. And my social media is at Latin Americana, like the novel Americana with an H at the end. So yeah, that's my plug. Thank you.
Cool, cool. Hey, Jumko, if you could put the title to the novel in the chat, that'd be awesome, so people can.
Sure.
Cool. John, what's going down with you? What's up? What do you want to plug?
Like, what can I talk about? Because there's a lot.
All the not the top secret stuff that will get you in trouble for mentioning.
I can't do that. I'm gonna throw out something real quick. Profe, so you just mentioned something about some story archetype that predates Batman. What was it?
Camasots, with like snatch bats, usually translated. It's from the Popol Vuh, the creatures that live in the House of Darkness, that the hero twins go inside and they hide inside their blowguns. They blow the blowguns up so they can fit inside their demigods. They can do that kind of stuff. But then one of the brothers sticks his head out at the wrong moment and gets his head chopped off, and it's used later as a ball in a ball game against the lords of Xibalba. So loads of fun. But yeah, the Camasots are enormous bats.
Wow. So what, you trying to develop a comic of that? Is that what you're thinking?
Well, yeah, it's actually, in fact, it's Henry Barajas. If you've seen his Helm Grey Castle, he's slowly building in, he's establishing an origin story for that superhero. It's exactly what we were talking about with retrofuturism. But I mean, that's important. But what I think is even more important is that you have John Jennings, an African-American, who is editor of a very important series now at Abrams that is publishing BIPOC comics creators, but he's making sure to get it right. And he's making sure to have those conversations and to pick up the phone, which I know we all are doing, we do on a daily basis as well. But what I guess is so beautiful about this and what we're doing here in this space is that we're not talking to a mirror of ourselves. We're reaching beyond comfort zones, because in fact, the real creativity is unlocked when we have that conversation, right, with someone. And that's what I love about that moment. But thanks, John, for asking.
So on that note, yeah, there might be a cover artist that I know that might have some interest in that, should that ever start to find its way toward reality. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. So I'll make it quick though. For me, Loteria, I guess, is kind of is a project that's been ongoing for the last several years, continues to be ongoing, and it's me just sort of doing my own takes on the classic Mexican game of chance that we all know and love. Still continuing to do that and have new cards coming out this year. As the people who follow those things know, I just kind of put them out as singles one at a time, because I'm doing this stuff in between all the bigger, more distributed commercial projects that I am doing covers for. And of course, these loterias are put out through my imprint, Lone Boy. So you can go to johnpicacio.com, JOHNPICACIO.com for more about Loteria. Follow me on Twitter at John Picacio, at JOHNPICACIO. And as far as my personal plugs, that's going to be the extent of it. But there are a couple of final broader plugs that I think are more important to me to plug at this moment. So within the Mexicanics initiative, I kind of reached out and I'll say a couple of them, and then there's one big one at the end. Ileana Vargas has a book, Yo no voy a salvarte. I think it's already been released. Alberto, I think you might know that better than me, but I think that has already come out. She wanted to make sure people knew about that, Ileana Vargas. I'm really happy to hear that Andrea Chapela has a new story coming out in the US market in Lightspeed. We've already talked about Andrea's work and how important she is to us. Future Tense, she also has a piece coming out in that in September. Gabriela Damian Miravete has a new book coming out through Oro Ediciones, and she's phenomenal. She won the, I guess, what do they call it now?
The Tiptree.
No, it's not the Tiptree Award anymore. They renamed. Oh,
yeah, it's
That's the word.
Otherwise, right? Is it Otherwise?
Yes, the Otherwise.
Yeah, they renamed it. But that's a big deal. That was a big deal, still is, and she's a big deal. And love her work and love what she does. And speaking of those ladies, they, along with Livia Brenda, and this is my final plug, did something that I think is one of the most important things. I don't want to give the Mexicanics Initiative the sort of credit as being in any way an influence on this, but I think I would imagine that their experience with Worldcon perhaps had some shred of influence on them creating something called Mexicona, Mexicona. And along with David's Dignidad Literaria, I think are two of the most important things that I have seen come out since the initiative. And in my opinion, are more important than the initiative because I think they're gonna have influence way beyond the initiative, which is what I always wanted. I just wanted there to be a legacy way beyond the initiative. The initiative was just planting, and Mexicona is extremely important. I love what's happening. Last year was the first one. This year is the second. They're taking on sponsorship soon. That event will be happening the last weekend of September. And I just think they're doing incredible work. That's Gabriela Damian Mirevete, Ileana Vargas, Libya Brenda, the great Libya Brenda, and Andrea Chapella. Tremendous work. So all love, and I'm passing the ball now.
Alberto, ¿qué nos tienes?
Okay, I just pasted 2 links on the chat. One is for an anthology of Mexican fiction. If you read Spanish, you can download an anthology I made in 2019, which has some speculative fiction and some other kinds of fiction. It's free to download. It's called Ciudad de Historias, City of Stories. Also, 2 months ago, a short story of mine was published in English in Future SF magazine. It's called The Second Celeste. And also, I'd like to recommend another anthology that's called El Tercer Mundo Después del Sol, The Third World After the Sun, which is a Colombian anthology of Latin American speculative fiction. It came out late 2020, and it has stories from 6 or 7 countries, I think. It can be bought in digital edition from Amazon, so it's readily available. and that's a very interesting anthology. As I said, made by Rodrigo Bastidas, a very interesting Colombian writer. Oh, and just one more thing. In September 14, there will come out in the US an anthology called Batman the World, which will have a short comic story of mine. I wrote it, and Mexican artist Rulo Valdez illustrated it. It's a story set in Mexico City and deals with violence, especially violence against women. We hope we have treated well that subject.
Great. Sabrina?
Okay, so a couple of things. Philadelphia has, every year it has its Latinx and diaspora comic book and sci-fi convention, which David, you've been at, and I know I think several folks, Lalo Alcaraz was there one year, the author of La Borinqueña. So that's Nerdtino. I don't know. I don't have the dates yet, but keep an eye out for that. There is a Ohio State anthology coming out called Speculative Fiction for Dreamers, which Federico has a piece in. I have a piece in. A sort of a historical, historical piece set in Philadelphia in the late 1800s with spaceships and other things. I have an interactive story. I'm going to drop the link. That's up at Apex. That's been up for a while. And this is purely interactive online. It doesn't exist in any other form, which is also very place-centric in Philadelphia and very much about the immigrant communities in Philadelphia. under the guise of a tour in a food truck. And I also, haven't fully read this, but think it's an interesting piece about futurisms. It's an anthology called En una orilla brumosa. And it's 5 rutas para repensar los futuros de las artes visuales y la literatura. And it's got some interesting essays in it, sort of different takes on futurism. Not all of them from Latin America, although there are a number of Mexican writers who have pieces in it.
Cool. And then, I'll just close by recommending some works of speculative fiction that are coming out. I'll plug them into the chat. I really recommend this beautiful work of like Mexican American futurism by Dana Barbara Higuera, The Last Cuentista. I read it. It's a beautiful, moving, amazing science fiction novel. It's written for teens, but it's definitely something that I think would resonate with adult readers as well. Coming out in, I think, February, I want to say, is the sci-fi anthology edited by Zoraida Cordova, Reclaim the Stars, coming from, I guess, from Macmillan. I have a story in there. It's a lot of really amazing stories from a broad cross-section of Latinx identities and sensibilities and so forth, that ranges from fantasy to futurism. And I think people are really going to find a lot to like in it. And then Guadalupe Garcia Macall's her middle grade fantasy novel, The Keeper, is coming out pretty soon, and I think again maybe early next year. And that is another really, really fantastic book. And I'm not just saying that because Guadalupe is my friend and we're co-authoring books together, but she's really, really amazing. And then Raul Gonzalez and I, of course, are launching our graphic novel series, Clarko Curandera, in October. The first volume is The Witch Owl Parliaments, which comes out simultaneously in Spanish. And I think that people are going to love this kind of like steampunk reimagining of like 1865 northern Mexico, southern Texas. It's it blends like indigenous magic with like the culture of the areas and like steampunk technology in an alternate universe. And I think that I really like. I think we've created a great superhero in Cristina Franco, and I think people are gonna really like the setup in book 1 and then the crazy stuff that happens in books 2 and 3. So looking forward to y'all reading it. And thank you so much to the panelists. Gracias por asistir, por participar. It's been a wonderful conversation. I admire you all so much. You're so brilliant, and I think that holding our ideas against each other, against one another, in the midst of sometimes tension, sometimes love and admiration, but always a lot of respect, has been really, really fruitful. And I hope that people who have been watching it have gotten a lot out of it. So please take care of yourselves. Nos vemos pronto. And this will be going up on YouTube in the next couple of days in a slightly edited version. So we can share it out to people who aren't able to be in attendance. Thank you so much.
David, thank you for organizing
Thank you.
it.
You're quite welcome.
Yes. Thank you for inviting us.